Hello and welcome to this edition of Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kim Min-ji, filling in for Kwon Jang-ho. President Moon Jae-in returns from his 8-day overseas trip Tuesday evening. He brings back with him the possibility of hosting North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Seoul within this year, which could stimulate his peace drive on the peninsula and further pave the way for progress between Pyongyang and Washington. Is South Korea back in the driver's seat when it comes to the denuclearization process? We'll have an expert in the studio later to answer that question. But first, let's turn to Devin Whiting at Arirang's News Center for a look at the day's headlines. Devin.
Hi, Minji. President Moon is in New Zealand on the last leg of his diplomatic tour around the world. Tuesday morning, he met with the Prime Minister there, and they agreed that their countries will continue to work together in ways that complement each other's strengths. Agriculture, for instance, in the case of New Zealand, and technology in Korea's case. President Moon also has the country's support in his efforts for peace. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun has this report.
Trade, defense, new industry, and Antarctic research. These are the areas, according to President Moon Jae-in, where Seoul and Wellington have agreed to further boost cooperation in order to enhance their 56-year-long bilateral relationship. The summit meeting between President Moon and Jacinda Ardin, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, took place on Tuesday morning local time, during which the South Korean president noted that New Zealand is not only an important partner for the Moon administration's new southern policy, but a country that shares a common goal with South Korea.
중일인과 나는 포용적 성장과 지속 가능 개발을 추구하는 그런 공통된 국정 철학을 가지고 있습니다. 앞으로 종민님과 함께 양국 관계를 더욱 호혜적이고 미래지향적으로 발전시켜 나가기를 희망합니다.
During their meeting, the two leaders agreed that the free trade agreement between Korea and New Zealand, which took effect in 2015, has become a solid foundation to promote trade and investment between the two countries, and pledged to continue such cooperation, especially by synergizing the strengths of both countries, New Zealand's agriculture and South Korea's infrastructure construction technology. Another technological collaboration will take place in Antarctic research, fusing New Zealand's vast experience as the original signee of the Antarctic Treaty and state-of-the-art research technologies developed by South Korea. The leaders also welcomed the scheduled launch of New Zealand's new South Korea-made military supply ship in 2019 and discussed ways to further expand the country's people-to-people exchanges. During the joint press conference, President Moon and Prime Minister Ardin confirmed New Zealand's support for South Korea's efforts to establish peace on the peninsula. When asked about North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's proposed visit to Seoul, President Moon insisted there is a possibility that it to take place within the year. He emphasized, however, what's more important than whether the visit will happen within the year or not is to realize Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul may lead to greater progress on North Korea's denuclearization. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the President's Special Committee on Income-Led Growth held a policy debate this afternoon involving experts, officials, and others about how to improve the business environment for the self-employed. The Special Committee is led by the former Senior Presidential Secretary for the Economy, Hong Jang-pyo. He said the forum's objective was to find policies that would help small businesses and the self-employed become more competitive. The committee calls them the key targets of the income-led growth policy. The participants discussed ways for local businesses and SMEs to thrive, for franchises and mom-and-pop businesses to prosper together, and how to reinforce the social safety net. Hong said that for the income-led growth policy to succeed, it's essential to increase these groups' overall sales as well as ease the burden of expenses on them. And he pledged to find ways to help the self-employed in particular better sustain their business and compete. South Korea's central bank released on Tuesday its revised data on GDP growth for the third quarter. It was more or less the same as forecast at 0.6%. Kim Hae-sung has the details.
South Korea's economy grew by 0.6% on quarter during the July to September period, on par with its second quarter growth rate.
The third quarter growth figure is in line with our estimate in October. While facilities investment were revised up, construction investment and private consumption were revised down.
Although facilities investment was 0.3 percentage points higher than the earlier estimate, it still tumbled 4.4% in the third quarter, led by reduced investment in machinery. Construction investment fell nearly 7%, with decreases in both building construction and civil engineering. Private consumption increased by 0.5 percentage point, mainly on higher spending on non-durable goods. Government spending expanded by 1.5% on healthcare expenditures. Exports, which account for nearly half of South Korea's GDP, rose around 4% on quarter, thanks to increase in semiconductor exports. On an on-year basis, South Korea's GDP expanded 2% in the third quarter, slower than the 2.8% growth seen in the second quarter. It's also the lowest figure in 9 years, which the Bank of Korea pointed to shorter working days as Chuseok holidays fell in September this year, and a base effect as GDP grew near 4% in the third quarter of 2017. Real gross national income expanded by 0.7% on quarter. The BOK says to reach its growth target of 2.7% for 2018, the local economy has to expand by more than 0.8% in the last quarter. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea has another satellite orbiting the Earth now. It was launched Monday from a U.S. Air Force base on a rocket made by Elon Musk's company, SpaceX. Its mission, to measure radiation in space and to observe the infrared light emitted by stars. Kan Hyung-woo reports.
The Falcon 9 rocket blasted off from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California on Monday at around 10:30 a.m. local time. About 8 minutes after the launch, the first stage of the rocket safely landed back on the drone ship. With that, U.S. aerospace manufacturer SpaceX successfully completed its mission to deploy 64 satellites into Earth orbit, including South Korea's next satellite 1. It has been confirmed by Seoul's Ministry of Science and the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology that the country's satellite successfully entered its orbital altitude and was in full operation about 6.5 hours after the launch. South Korea's satellite was developed by the KITES from 2012 to 2018. It will measure space radiation and keep track of stars' infrared rays for the next 2 years. Currently, South Korea operates 4 satellites for Earth and weather observation. What's especially remarkable about Monday's launch is that it was the third time SpaceX has reused the Falcon 9. Most rockets are discarded after they have been used once. It's also the most satellites ever taken on a single launch from U.S. soil. But the path to success was far from smooth. It was first delayed when SpaceX extended an inspection of its rocket, and the launch was also postponed multiple times due to bad weather conditions. The rocket carried 15 microsatellites and 49 cube satellites from private entities and governments, including 25 from international organizations. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
President Moon Jae-in has expressed his hopes that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul will happen before the end of the month, highlighting the positive impact such an occasion would have. He also says U.S. President Donald Trump is open to listening to the North Korean leader's wishes if it helps the denuclearization process. Hwang Ho-jun reports.
If the North Korean leader comes to Seoul, as it's hoped he will by the end of the year, President Moon Jae-in says he has a message for him from President Trump.
김 정은 위원장과 함께 남은 이 합의를 다 마저 이행하기를 바라고 또 김정은 위원장이 바라는 바를 자기가 이루어주겠다 뭐 이런 메시지를 전해달라는 당부를 하기도 했습니다.
But apparently, President Trump doesn't necessarily mean concessions or relief from sanctions. Rather, President Moon said it could be things like the scaling down of South Korea-U.S. joint military drills or non-political exchanges like sports and cultural events. He told reporters, though, that whether or not Kim Jong-un comes to Seoul is completely up to him, and they'll have to wait and see what happens.
김정은 위원장의 서울 답방이 이루어진다면 그 자체로서 이 세계에 이렇게 보내는 평화적인 어떤 메시지, 그다음에 또 비핵화에 대한 의지, 또 남북 관계 발전에 대한 의지 모든 것을 다 담고 있는 것이라고 봅니다.
When asked whether there are differences between Seoul and Washington in their respective North Korea policies, the South Korean leader dismissed the idea.
트럼프 대통령과 여러 차례 만나고 또 이렇게 통화하고 하면서 이제는 상당한 신뢰, 그다음에 우위가 구축되었다. 그런 생각을 가지고 있거든요. 이렇게 한미 간에 무력함이 있다든지 이런 부분에 대해서 도대체 어떤 근거로 그런 식의 이야기를 하는지 모르겠어요.
President Moon said the next Kim-Trump summit, expected to take place early next year, will be an important opportunity to speed things up, though he said he's not at all concerned about the slow progress made over the past month or two. Instead, he expressed optimism that the process will turn out just fine. Jun, Arirang News.
And for more analysis on this, we have with us here in the studio Professor Min Jonghoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. It's great to have you with us.
My pleasure.
So looking at President Moon Jae-in's trip, we can say that he's provided a shot in the arm for the standstill between the denuclearization talks between North Korea and the U.S. Before Moon's departure, the two sides even had difficulty rescheduling the high-level talks. How do you assess the president's trip overall?
Yes, you are right. Before the President Moon's trip this time, it seemed that the North Korea-U.S. negotiations were in a stalemate. It's mainly because of the gap that two countries have in terms of the denuclearization process. As you know well, North Korea wants to have some kind of the economic sanction relieved or lifted because it argues that it has taken the serious the denuclearization measures already. But the United States argues that the North Korea has not taken enough measures, so the U.S. is ready to take corresponding measures like the having the declaration to end the Korean War or the relieving the economic sanctions. So in terms of the gaps that two countries have, it was not easy for the two countries to move on. And as you mentioned, the high-level talks have been delayed. So we got a little bit tough situations in terms of the making the negotiations go forward. And fortunately, I think that the South Korea-U.S. summit this time in Argentina has provided North Korea and the United States with the momentum that the two countries move on. Specifically, I assess that the President Moon's trip this time successful in terms of the three aspects in terms of the denuclearization process. First, it has been reaffirmed that the President Trump still has the serious intention to talk with North Korea because there were some concerning voices in Washington that President Trump may lose some interest in terms of talking with North Korea because it has been stalemated. But in terms of the summit this time, President Trump showed a strong intention to talk with North Korea. So it's a good positive signal. And secondly, it has been also reaffirmed that South Korea and the U.S. got the very strong cooperation in terms of the dealing with the North Korea issue. In terms of the possibility of relieving economic sanctions to North Korea, some people worried about the possibility that the U.S. got the different situations and positions than the South Korea in terms of the helping North Korea to have the better economic situations. So the many people worry about that situation or the scenario, but the two leaders in this summit reaffirmed that the two countries got the same voice and situations and the positions that the economic sanctions to North Korea would be continued until North Korea completes its denuclearization. So we don't need to worry about the scenario or possibility that the two countries got some kind of the cleavage or some kind of the problems in terms of cooperating each other. And finally, I think that President Trump reaffirmed that South Korea still needed to play an active, the facilitating role in terms of the narrowing gaps between North Korea and the United States. So in terms of the three important performances that President Moon got in terms of the summit with President Trump, I think that his trip was successful, and it also provided North Korea to move on. It's kind of the momentum that North Korea could move forward. So now it's time that the North Korea leader, Chairman Kim, makes a decision and just facilitate the negotiation process.
A very detailed analysis there. One of the highlights of his Moon's trip, in fact, was his summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. And he also extended a message that he wants Moon to relay to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump said that he was very fond of Chairman Kim and that he will make sure that Kim gets what he wants if Pyongyang does decide to denuclearize. What significance do you think this message has? And you did mention it earlier, but could we say that the U.S. has acknowledged Korea's role as a mediator in this process?
Yes, for the first part of the question, I think that President Trump has given Chairman Kim its kind of momentum or the ground that he could move forward in terms of talking with the United States. It has been known that the two countries, North Korea and the U.S., got the stalled situations in terms of the denuclearization negotiations because, as I mentioned earlier, two countries got totally different the perspectives and the preferences in terms of dealing with the other. But North Korea wanted to have the economic sanctions relieved, but the U.S. rejected to do that. So the North Korea may think that U.S. does not have any kind of serious intention to provide that kind of the measures, corresponding measure. But so the North Korea got the hard time following what U.S. wants and resume the high-level talks. So the U.S. and President Trump acknowledged the situation, and when he met the President Moon this time, he opened some kind of ground room that Chairman Kim moved on. So I think that President Trump made the big decision in terms of the resuming high-level talks and the facilitating the possibility of holding the second U.S. and North Korea summit. And further, the later part of your question, the facilitating role of the South Korea, yes, I think so. And President Trump repeated his statement that the President Moon should be kind of a chief negotiator in terms of the North Korea-U.S. the negotiations. So this time, when President Trump met the President Moon, he also requested that kind of role to the President Moon. And so President Moon actively took the situation and the role. And I believe that the President Moon, after coming back from the trip, he and his government officials tried to contact the North Korean counterparts and try to facilitate the process.
So President Moon has also been able to use the G20 to promote and get support for his peace initiative. He held bilateral summits not only with traditional allies like the U.S., but also the Czech Republic, Argentina, New Zealand, the Netherlands. What significance do these string of summits have?
Yeah, basically the denuclearization process and the peace-building process of Korean Peninsula. That is kind of the security matter surrounding the Korean Peninsula. But it also affects the regional security and the global security. So the international community, such as the United Nations, got a lot of attention to the security matter that are surrounding the Korean Peninsula now. And as you know, the UN is directly involved in their imposing sanctions to North Korea. So now 3 or 4 countries, the South Korea, North Korea, United States, and or the China, the 3 or 4 countries mainly deal with the denuclearization process and the peace, the building process of the peninsula, but it would eventually touch the international community as the negotiations make progress. So it is necessary and important for South Korea to talk with the main actors of the internet community, like you mentioned, and let them know what South Korea wants and get their support on what we are doing. So I believe that such efforts will pay off later in the negotiation process.
Now, like you mentioned earlier, there are still lingering concerns that Seoul and Washington may be on divergent paths when it comes to sanctions relief on North Korea. Do you think the recent Moon-Trump summit was able to alleviate some of these concerns?
Yes, I think so. My institution, KNDA, and our representatives visited Washington last week, and we met the Washington experts and the government officials, and we mainly talked about the current security situations of the Korean Peninsula. And as you mentioned, there were the concerning voices in Washington that specifically inter-Korean relations are going too fast than the North Korea-U.S. relations, mainly in terms of the possibility of relieving economic sanctions North Korea. Some in Washington, they argued that South Korea tried to help North Korea, mainly in terms of the relieving sanctions, although U.S. isn't ready to go with. So there's kind of a sort of mismatch between the two countries, even they are the strong allies. But during the ROK-U.S. summit this time in Argentina, the two leaders reaffirmed that economic sanctions to North Korea would be maintained until North Korea completes its denuclearization. So I believe that ROK and U.S. cooperation is very strong, so we don't need to have the concern anymore.
So what kind of compromises do you think President Moon is trying to juggle around? I mean, he's seemingly caught between Trump and Kim Jong-un. So what kind of middle ground is possible?
It's a very difficult question to answer. But the most importantly, I think that what the President Moon and what South Korea can do in terms of facilitating the North Korea-U.S. negotiations is to build the trust between the two countries. You know, this time, the negotiations are proceeded in terms of the top model or the top leader model or top leader approach, so like a top-down approach. So the top leaders make decisions, and the government officials just implement such kind of the decisions. So there's the trust building between the top leaders is by far the most important the factor that we can do, like the South Korea and the President does. So that's why the South Korea and the President Moon emphasize the virtuous circle. Virtuous circle, like the improving the inter-Korean relations, could lead the improving the North Korea-U.S. relations. And such kind of the virtuous circle could contribute to the building there's a peace, the regime or the peace, the system on the Korean Peninsula. So I'm not sure about what kind of the specific the plans that our government has, but think about what we have done in terms of dealing with North Korea. We got the 3 inter-Korean summits, and we got the specific the arrangements or agreements in terms of the building trust between the two Koreas and alleviating the military tensions around the Korean Peninsula. And we are trying to provide or prepare for the future economic cooperations in terms of the two Koreas. So those measures could contribute to the building trust between the two Koreas. And after having the better the understandings and the trust between the two Koreas, North Korea, Chairman Kim could more the trust what President Moon talks about. So after having the better understandings and better the trust between the two Koreas, then based on the bigger the trust, the Chairman Kim got the better situations in terms of dealing with President Trump. So that's what our president is doing. So maybe in terms of the Yongbyon, the nuclear facilities, how to dismantle or how to declare, how to verify such the facilities, our government may propose some kind of the roadmap to do that, and in return for such kind of the North Korea's measure, so our government may propose some kind of corresponding measures that U.S. could take to North Korea, like the relieving the economic sanctions, but it was not easy that the U.S. would relieve the U.S. sanctions because it's kind of domestic law. So we may think about the possibility of relieving the UN sanctions, but it is also tough. So so my government or our government may think about the possibility of extending exemptions in terms of the inter-Korean economic cooperation. But it's all the preparatory things. So basically, in terms of the building trust between the two Koreas and the building trust between North Korea and U.S. Should be the most important thing. And there are also some kind of possible scenarios, but I'm not sure by 100% about the scenarios. Just let you know about some kind of scenarios that I read from the other media.
Just a short question before we let you go. So the president's trip has given optimism for North Korean leader to visit Seoul within the end of this year. How likely do you see this scenario at this moment in time?
It all depends on, I think, how much North Korea could make the progress in terms of providing the denuclearization measures to the United States, and what kind of the corresponding measures U.S. could provide to North Korea. If Chairman Kim makes a big decision in terms of the providing the measures in terms of denuclearizing itself, like the Yongbyon nuclear facilities, like the declaration and the verification process, then I think that there is a possibility that U.S. could provide the corresponding measures that the North Korea wants. So if Chairman Kim could be satisfied with that kind of the give and take the approach or the measures, then Chairman Kim could make a decision to visit Seoul toward the end of this year. But if Chairman Kim is not satisfied with the current situation, then we need to wait and see, and it could be delayed for only next year or sometime later than that. So all depends on the denuclearization, the process.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our show. Join us again tomorrow for more analysis on the day's top issues. But in the meantime, tune into our later newscast for all the latest updates. Thank you for watching and see you again soon. Goodbye.